Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the early morning. So, welcome to lecture 9. As you guys know, today is the fabulous substance painter lecture. Um, it used to be a lot more exciting when you guys didn't get substance painter in your earlier classes. But we will be doing one thing I know you haven't done, and we will be coming in. We will be. Got a text from Tony Saxon. We will be bringing our textures back into Maya, specifically the Arnold materials, so that you can actually get a render out of Arnold containing your textures. For those of you who are in CA, this will be vitally important because you will, you know, have to do this at some point. For those of you who are in GA, this will be good practice on exporting your textures and importing them into another software. If you are GA, you will be exporting them and importing them into Unreal, perhaps one day Unity, but that is something you will need to practice as well. I typically put my color maps on at least things in Maya, but generally things get together in the game engine. So let's talk a little bit about who I am and why I am talking to you today and not Tony Saxon. Wow. Okay. So I guess my slides are just teeny tiny now. Sorry about that. For the past few months, I have actually been using my home setup, and I have a very large screen that I plug my laptop into, and I don't get to use that today. So I'm very sad about that because I'm used to so much more screen resolution. You guys don't even know. My screen is like 3 times the size of this one. So going down to just one screen, it makes me rather sad. So let's quit that because we need all the resources we're going to have. Actually, why is this open? Go ahead and close that. We're not going to need that. So, my name is Tony Bagsby. I am the Associate Course Director of Shading and Lighting. I mostly handle everything online. You guys have probably seen me in the Discord, especially if you're online late at night, because I'm typically online late at night. We got one more person, which means I'm going to have to take another screenshot. All right. Yes, I got my experience as an environment artist in games before my Full Sail time. That means that I did a lot of work in game engine. I was actually on the second ever team to ever use the Unity engine outside of Unity. The first one was a Cartoon Network team making a game called Fusion Fall. And then after them, we were the first ones to ever use Unity. So it was actually crazy to see Unity blow up. And I'm like, whoa, I already know that software. But everybody else is using it. Where did they get a hold of it? They're a big boy now, and they were definitely a little boy back in the day. We actually have someone who played Fusion Fall. That was the first game developed in Unity. I did not play it, but it was like a Cartoon Network.
Ball.
What'd you say?
Yeah, I used to play Fusion Ball back when I was a kid.
Yeah, it was like a little Cartoon Network game from what I remember.
Yeah.
And a bunch of Cartoon Network characters in it. Anyway, So that's where I got my practice at first doing environments. I did do a lot of material work back in the day, materials, textures, a little bit of lighting. Um, but after that, I came here to Full Sail, and I also started my own company called the Corgi Art House. I started Indienomicon, which was an indie-based community organization based out of Orlando. And I currently have a second office at the Orlando Game Space for my company, where we do contract artwork for games and app development and AR and simulation and really just whatever freelance work I can get my hands on that we are trained to do. Yeah. So that's who I am. I am one of the first people at Full Sail to actually embrace substance. I met the substance crew out at GDC, the Game Developers Conference, and a couple of people that I know from the games industry who are like really on it. We're all like, you need to learn this and bring it to Full Sail. So I was like, okay. So went and I met the substance crew and got to know them, and learned a little bit about Substance Painter, brought it here to Full Sail, told everybody about it, and eventually they got on board. And I mean, now we use Substance a lot. Everybody uses Substance. It is the go-to texturing application. But that's sort of my story. You can go see some examples of my work. It's mostly Tiger Woods. There's an environment I did, and then there was a cool Samsung Gear VR game that I made or worked on called Disc League. I didn't make it. I did work contract for the guy who was making it, and we did 3 out of his 4 environments. I did half of them myself. But the other 2, he had one made internally, and then the other one I hired somebody to work with me. Well, it was kind of cool. If you use the Samsung Gear VR, which I'm betting nobody did because it had a very small demographic, but of the people who used it, Disc League was probably one of the most popular games on there. And I worked on it, so it was fun. Okay, so here is the conversation I want to have today before we begin. Why Substance Painter? Because Tony Sexton has already taught you guys Photoshop, and you can make textures in Photoshop. This is true. You could do all of your texturing work in Photoshop. I mean, it's definitely possible. It's what we did before Substance Painter, from about, I want to say, let's say 2004, 2000, really, let's say 2005 to about 2012, maybe 2011. That's how I textured. That's how everybody textured. So why don't we do it that way? Why when we use Photoshop? We already have Photoshop. Why would we use Substance Painter? What do you guys think? Because it's superior, but why is it superior? It's a tool made for the job. That is true. It is the first dedicated texturing tool. Um, there was another one that came along. It worked inside Photoshop as a plugin. It was fairly popular, but in the end, Substance Painter was just so awesome that Adobe bought Substance Painter anyway. It's free. It's not free. The educational version is free. Oh no, it's not free. The other tool I'm talking about isn't free. But tell me, why Substance Painter instead of Photoshop? I mean, we already have Photoshop. Why don't we just use Photoshop? Why did everybody love this other software? What do you guys think? Oh, actually, we had somebody answered. I'm going to butcher this name, but Ekaterina? I apologize if I butchered that, but she says we have smart materials and smart mass, which basically means procedural texturing. That is definitely one of the answers. Procedural effects. You can paint directly on the objects. Thank you, Tyra. That's what I was looking for. you can paint directly on your objects. Like that is such a win. You have no idea. You guys have no idea what life was like before this, and we had to paint on the actual textures in Photoshop, just blindly guessing what it was going to look like on the model. It was ridiculous, but we did it for years. And I was not the first 3D artist. People were doing that before me for years. But it was ridiculous because we would open up the actual collage texture in Photoshop. We would paint the texture. And we'd be like, I think this is what it's going to look like. And we'd throw it on the model and open it in Maya or whatever, just like you guys are doing now. We would open it up and we would look at it and we'd be like, that's not what I thought it was going to look like. And then we would go and we would fix it in Photoshop and we would export it again and hope this time we got it correct. So it was a ridiculous workflow, but that's what we did for years. We just kind of guessed, and then Substance Painter came along and they're like, hey, you can paint directly on the model. And the amount of iteration we had to do back and forth was significantly better. I went from like having 65 iterations per anything a texture I worked on, having like 4 or 5. Because also there are things that Substance Painter does where you can kind of estimate your lighting a little bit. You may have to make adjustments based on your lighting and your scene, but we can actually put our dome light in and get a little bit of our dome on our model. It just, stuff like this that just like improves quality of life. It's so much better. So much better. In addition to that, there's one other thing I wanted to talk about, and that is PBR workflow. So PBR workflow is the foundation that Substance Painter was built on. And it was popularized by really the first one to start ever doing that was it was a little studio some of you may have heard of, a little studio called Kojima Studios, and they made a little game called Metal Gear. And by now, hopefully, you realize the heavy sarcasm in my voice, because that is a very big game. But they started using it, and they were using it for their Metal Gear game, and they were, it was drastically superior. It's PBR stands for photo-based rendering, and sorry, I'm saving the attendance again because we had somebody else sneak in. Okay. Not taking no more attendance, but do you think we'll be blue on the haha? Okay, so yes, they were the first ones to show up with PBR, and it is really a superior texturing solution because it focuses on color via 4 channels. One is going to be your color, one is your height map or your normal map, one is your metallic or roughness, or metallic or specular based on which of the 2 concepts you're using. And then the final one is roughness. And if you guys have not been focusing on what roughness does in your materials and what roughness does in your textures, you're missing out, because roughness is a game changer. It really changes how your textures look. And we're going to be talking about it today when we're doing some texturing in Substance Painter. So those are the 2 major reasons why there was such a heavy shift into Substance Painter, or the other one that I can't remember. Shane Proctor was a big fan of it, but he got on board with Substance Painter. So let's talk a little bit more about Substance Painter. So we're going to be, I'll go over the basic interface a little bit because I know it's been a little while since you guys were using Substance Painter, but we're not going to go heavy into the basics. You guys should know the basics. We're going to try and push a little bit further, and we're going to get into a lot of that procedural workflow. I'm going to ask, have any of you guys used a mask in texturing at all? Substance Painter or Photoshop? Does anybody know what a mask is? Got a couple of yeses. Got a lot of yeses. Like 5 yeses. 6 yeses. Okay. For those of you who don't know, just really quickly, a mask is a image that you put on the layer and is a black and white image. And where you paint black, your texture disappears, and where you paint white, your texture is visible. This is a really just awesome optimized workflow for anything because you can paint details out by painting black over it in a mask. And if you don't want them there, that's great. If you later decide that you do want them there, you just paint white in there and they reappear. We are going to use this workflow in Substance Painter, but it is also useful for Photoshop texturing. So even when you guys are doing your Photoshop textures, you can use this workflow. I also need to mention the difference between collage and repeatable textures. So the textures that you were generating using Substance Painter via the textures in Photoshop that you're going to be, I'm sorry, not Substance Painter, the ones that you were creating in Photoshop are called tileable textures. Those are not the same thing as collage textures. So there are a couple of differences. Tileable textures, as the name implies, are meant to be tiled. They're meant to be repeating over and over again. They're generally meant for objects that have a large surface like a wall or a floor or something like that, or a carpet, something where the pattern is going to be easily repeating, and they have a challenge where the image has to line up where it tiles and not have noticeable seams in the texture repeating. Those are tileable textures. Those are the base textures that you are generating that you're going to be applying to most of your models inside of Arnold. However, when we go into Substance Painter creates collage textures specifically. What are collage textures? Collage textures are, if you've ever seen them, they're typically what you use for a character, and they are created using the 0 to 1 space and having your UVs laid out and not repeat. So that is the big difference, because repeating textures, they tile outside of the 0 to 1. So even if your UVs are outside 0 to 1, they can be textured and be fine as long as you're doing repeatable textures. Also, you can have UVs overlapping if you're doing repeatable textures, no problem. However, whenever you go into using collage textures, that option goes away, because those textures are going to be very specific to painting a specific region. And if you have repeating textures, you have to do a lot of special things to make them actually work the way that you want them to, unless you are doing, there's some special workflow things that you can do to make them work, like UDIMs. We're not going to get into that. So for today, just imagine that you have to have your UVs not overlapping. A lot of these objects that we're going to have to be working with are going to have to be UV'd. So if you need to UV those assets, please do not worry about trying to keep with me pace for pace in the demo. This is meant to be something that you can look back on later and redo. But stick with me, take notes, keep Substance Painter open, kind of play around and see what you're doing. It should work very similar. I did change the UVs on the cutting board a little bit, but everything should work the same. We will be baking out our texture maps. This is another reason why we have to have collage UVs. We are going to be focusing on a couple of these maps, well, a lot of these. World space normal, ambient occlusion, curvature, position, and thickness. We will not be using the normal channel. We will not be using material IDs. Material IDs are great. I didn't set the models up for them. And I really don't think we have time to get into material IDs. So we're just going to ignore those. Normal maps are specifically used to bake details from high resolution models to low resolution models. So if you've ever used ZBrush for anything, it used to be something that was focused on a lot before this class, but it's a little complicated, so a lot of students were having trouble grasping it. Substance Painter was a little bit easier to grasp, and textures, so pretty great. So that's why they teach that instead of ZBrush. But The idea is you would go in, you'd make your ZBrush model, you'd get a lower resolution mesh that you could run in Maya or in Unreal without it being a huge chug. And you would bake the details from the high resolution to the low resolution. You can do that in Maya. You can do that in ZBrush. You can do it in Substance Painter. I recommend doing it in Substance Painter. It is the best of the bakers. We used to have something, what was that called? I think it was X Normal. It was a little baker, and all it did was bake textures. And I used it, and I loved it. But it was better than Maya, and it was better than ZBrush, but it was not better than Substance Painter. So I haven't used it in a long time. And I'm very sad because that little baker was awesome. It wasn't updated frequently though. Okay, brushes. We're not going to get too much into brushes. I am going to talk a little bit about some of the brush settings. Mostly, we're going to talk about tangent versus UV space, and we're probably just going to briefly go over that. It's not massively useful, but what tangent versus UV allows you to do is tangent is the normal version, but UV will recognize the UV borders between UV shells. And that means if you have something where you specifically split the shells because you know there's a seam, let's say you're doing a character and your character has a iron breastplate and you want to paint that breastplate, but you don't want to get your painting working on the breastplate. You don't want to accidentally paint onto another part of the model. You can switch to UV alignment, and that way it will kind of like focus on those UV borders, and it'll be a lot harder to accidentally paint your rust details that you're putting on your iron chest plate on like the leather under armor that the character has, or the say has a linen gamberson. Then that detail would not fall off the chest plate. It would kind of stick to the chest plate. Other than that, there's not a lot I'm going to get into. I am going to probably be frustrated by the minimum scale and the minimum flow of some of the brushes. But we're going to be mostly sticking with the artistic brush and probably the Dirt 2 brush, because I'm not going to lie, it's my favorite brush. It's just a good brush. And some of the other teachers honestly pick on me about that because they're like, oh, why are you so into that brush? But then they use the brush and they're like, oh, it's a good brush. It's a good brush. Again, we're going to be using the channel feature of the workflow in Substance Painter. So there are certain channels, the first one obviously being color, but then we have roughness. We're going to have some metallic. We're going to have some height map. We're going to bake those in. We are going to be getting into procedurals a lot. So you guys mentioned smart mass and smart materials. We're not going to be getting into smart materials very much. And that is typically because smart materials, if you're using them willy-nilly, it can look like you're a novice. I want to teach you guys the underlying thought process of how these materials are working together so that you kind of know how smart materials work. Because if you're just throwing smart materials on things, you're not really getting the most out of them. You need to understand how to build these things up and why smart materials are doing some of the things they're doing, and then make adjustments based on that. Another person? Jeez. All right. Well, that guy's just really late, so we'll catch him after the break. So yeah, we'll be using some smart mass. Works like a mass in Photoshop. Check some of those out, and then we'll be baking, and we'll be getting back into Maya, and we'll be plugging all of our things in. So something like clicking in the room. Okay. That's it for my slides. I don't want to get too much into slides. This is mostly like doing things lecture. Let's pop over to Maya over here. Ooh, Maya. What happened to you? It's a weird visual bug I don't think you guys can even see. Come on. Okay. Forgot to open my file. So we're going to be working on the exterior scene today. If you guys have the interior scene, then you can watch last month's lecture. This is interior or exterior night. I actually wrote exterior day in my file name, but that is wrong. I know because I prepped the file last night. So I have a couple of materials in here. I was a little foolish and I actually didn't put any of the material attributes for, where are they? Ugh, hang on, let me get my shelf. It's gonna not load my shelf. Cool. Awesome. All right, well, delete our history. So I specifically did not set the materials up yet, and that is just because I'm trying to optimize the scene for this lecture. When I start trying to do all of this textury stuff, rendering, and doing a screen share with you guys, it gets bogged down a lot. So I'm only going to be focusing on the materials that we're going to be working on for Substance. And as a reminder, you guys are required to do one metal and one non-metal. It doesn't matter which ones you do. We're going to recommend things that are going to be close to the camera. So I recommend doing those. Generally, I recommend doing the cutting board and the candle holder. I know there is no candle holder if you're doing the daytime scene, so you might need to use the knife blade. I have already set up material assignments. And when you go into Substance Painter, it is going to recognize objects by their material assignments, not by their Maya object formats. So a couple of things to go over. Number one, I've actually saved this just for you guys. Go in here. My screen is so tiny. I don't know how you guys do it. Press 1. You'll notice that this knife goes back into this ugly, boxy viewpoint. This is how Substance Painter is going to recognize it. So instead, make sure everything is in one mode and then go to Mesh and go to Smooth, and it will be the correct, the correct amount of geometry that we're going to need to export. So that will be that. A couple of things about the UVs. Where's my Arnold shelf? I can't believe my personal shelf doesn't work. That frustrates me and infuriates me. So about the UVs, a couple of things real quick. I have changed a number of the UVs around. The knife specifically had a lot of UV work to be done because the blade had no UVs. So if you're going to do that, you got to UV that. The candle holder has a number of parts. I've had to re-UV all of them. It's not fun, but it did it. It's got UVs now. You guys will also have to UV that, and we will be demoing the candle holder. The bread, actually, let's talk about the bread briefly because the bread is special. So the bread has some super weird UVs, but it is actually designed so that you can take that bread reference image that we give you on the portal. You actually slap that on as a texture and it will work as a color map. You can take that into Photoshop and you can take the saturation out and work with the levels to make it into a bump map as well. We recommend doing that workflow because texturing the bread on your own is massively difficult. So you can actually just use the reference as a color texture for the bread, which is kind of fun. Okay. So, all right. With that said, I think we're ready to export. So let's do it. And bring in the cheese and the knife and this cookie and the candle holder. Thing there. Okay, so these are the objects I'm going to export. My material is going to work cleverly so that when I do my candle texture, it will actually apply to these parts of the candle as well. There was, no, I did fix that, so never mind. So yeah, I'm just going to leave these unassigned and then we'll go ahead and export that later. Okay. So all we do is we go over here, File, not the game exporter. Sorry, I'm reflexively going to that because that's what I used for my contract work. Export selection. I actually didn't need to do that. Let's hit this. Now, go up here actually, and I'm going to put these in my scenes FBX folder because that's how I like to do my workflow. And we're on 06. Now, you guys may have noticed a difference. When you open up your exporter, you're not going to have the first window. You'll have one large Maya window. I'm using the OS X native, and it's just because on the Mac, I simply like it better. What this allows me to do is this panel is going to be on the right-hand side of your Maya window. So it's going to be there. But the only difference is that I like to turn off the animation, and then I will go to the advanced options, and I will go down to FBX file format, and I'll use this old, super old version. There's a reason why I do this, and as far as I know up until 2019 they didn't fix it. No, they haven't fixed it in 2020, so maybe 2021 too they'll fix it. But the problem was if you export a model from Maya using an FBX importer, you actually can't import that back in unless you're using an older version. It will export just fine into Substance Painter. So it'll export just fine into Unreal. It'll export just fine into Unity. It'll export just fine into Sketchfab. I've tested all of those thoroughly. But if you're working with other artists, which specifically this happened to me, and I was like, hey, can you do this to this file? I gave him a file and he was like, no, it won't open. And he was using mine. He was using the same software as me. It specifically won't go back into Maya. It won't go into Max or at 3D Studio Max. It won't go into Blender. It won't go into Cinema 4D or Softimage or any other modeling application. And it is just a weird thing about the FBX format. So I use this old version of it. But something I wanted to make you guys aware of in case one day that bites you in the butt. There we go. And we should have exported that. And that's it for Maya for now. I'm going to close it because it uses up a ton of my resources. And now we are back into Substance Painter. I'm going to check and make sure that exported actually. Yep, there we go. Here's our little export. So let's open the Substance Launcher. Okay, so the Substance Launcher is not required to use Substance. You can just download the application to your desktop. I use this thing all the time, though. I love this. So in addition to giving me control over which versions I'm using, if I want to use a different version, I just click that version and I click install and it will install the latest version. It gives me all of my Substance softwares in one location. Log in. Hey, I'm logged in. Should not log me in. Log in. Crazy. So we may demo Substance Alchemist if we have time. I didn't get a chance to demo it last month, but this is really great software as well. And let's talk about Substance Source. So this is also the great thing. Substance Source is a digital resource for materials. And really, between this and Megascans, I'm gonna be honest, they're doing their darndest to make sure that we don't have to generate our own textures. There's a ton of these smart materials. And look, if you look here, there's over 7,000 different materials that are just available in this software alone. If you're paying for a license to it, you get like 300 points a year to just download these softwares. And so you can download materials and you don't have to make them. As well, a bunch of them are frequently on sale for free. So you can see a bunch of these say owned. All you have to do is download them and you own them. Oh, here's one, for example, that's free. So I'm just going to download this. And I'm not even going to keep it. I'm going to delete it. But if I download it, it is now in my database and I can get it later for free. And they rotate these out. So that's why I'm like obsessively in here checking and being like, is there any that I'm missing? Because I don't want to miss on free stuff. not even stuff that I need to download and keep on my hard drive. It just remembers. So if I go to my assets, you can see I have 68 assets. How many free were there? Should have all the frees. 70. What? What am I missing? I'm missing free stuff. Oh no, I have 108 materials. Okay, that makes more sense. Anyway, get free materials. So keep an eye on that because, we all like free stuff. But yeah, I have the indie license of Substance Painter for my little company, and they give you like 300 free materials a month. Not free; it's included in the like $250 you pay a year. So, I mean, it is a value. The substance suite, I can tell you that. Uh, all right, well, let's hop into Substance Painter. I've wasted enough time. Oh, really quickly while that loads up. You also have this cute little Sketchfab viewer. And what this does allow you to do is talk to you about you later, alien. You can actually download these straight into Substance Painter and check out the textures and how they built them. Or you can just download them onto your computer and have them for free. I don't believe any works with any of the animations though. Okay, Substance is so tiny. Substance, I'm used to you on such a huge monitor. Oh, this is going to be so frustrating to use. Can I move this? This is just taking up, this stupid shelf is taking up so much space. I know you guys don't really need me complaining about the tiny screen that I have. You're like, we've been using it the whole time. I like my second monitor. Okay, so here we are in Substance Painter. It's going to go to new. We're going to load up our project. Not there. Ignore that whole folder. Some other things I was working on. So Substance Painter, here is our FBX. Just open it up. I'm going to keep the document resolution at 1024. That's fine. It is a little large for some of the things we're doing, but they are close to the camera. So 1024 probably isn't going to be bad. So let's go ahead and let's see if I imported everything I wanted to. I did. Yeah, cool. All right. So normally I do like this split workflow, but since I'm only got one monitor, I'm going to lower it like that. Okay. So here's all of the objects. If you go into our material editor, you can see everything kind of divided up by materials. I have the knife. I've separated the knife so it's one material. That may actually bite me in the bum based on how materials work, but we'll figure it out. Cutting board. There we go. This cookie, that's something for later, but we're going to actually be focusing on the cutting board and the candle holder. We're going to do the cutting board first. You're only required to do 2 assets. So I imported a lot of these things from the still life, and I may take some time and kind of show off some like nice little techniques on some of these other things if there's time. I'm probably going to show you a little bit about the bread, but again, focus, cutting board, candlestick holder. So where's it? Cutting board, and then hide all. They had more options here before. Wait. Okay, there's the solo button. Okay. First thing I mentioned, we're going to bake some textures. Actually, let's bring everything back. By the way, you may have more windows. I eliminate everything except for the viewport, the shelf, the layers, and the properties. And the reason for that is all of these, you're not going to use them frequently. Show all. So there's not really much point for them to be there all the time. So you can just click on them and the window will open up. I'm going to bake mesh maps. So as I mentioned, we're not going to be doing normal. We are going to be doing world space. We're not going to be doing material ID. We are going to be doing ambient occlusion. But when we do ambient occlusion, we are going to where's it? Self-occlusion. Here's what I want. Only say mesh name. Same for the curvature. Usually, is it curvature or is it thickness? Yeah. Also only say mesh name. I think that's the only thing. Might need to do it on the cheese actually. Annoyingly, these settings are all per object. So I'm only going to do it on the ones that I know are going to be affected. And what this does is this is going to prevent me from getting like shadows on it. So let's go ahead and we can actually select one we want to bake, but we're going to bake it on everything. Actually, no, we're not. We're not going to bake the cheese. We're not going to bake the knife. We'll bake it later if I decide to do it. So, all right, bake selected textures. Go. Bake, 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 bake. Baking all the textures. Okay, cool. And so now if we go over to these and we check the X, whatever. All right, so we check these. We should have world space normal maps, curvature, position data, and ambient occlusion for everything except for the cheese and the knife, which is cool. Okay. There we go. Oh, well, some of these work. I don't know why the X isn't working. Whatever. All right. So, a couple more things. We're not ready to begin yet. A lot of pre-production. Solo that. Let's go to display settings. So in here, let's turn our environment up and our blur down. So this is not good for our dome because it is nothing like what we're going to be seeing. The closest thing for this one is probably, is it the glazed patio? Yeah, this one would probably be good, but we don't have to even be like, all right, well, this one's kind of close. We can get the exact image in here by going to import. So we're going to import a bunch of our textures right here. Add resources. So I want a number of things. I want source images. So I want my texture. Yep, it's that. So I want that. I want my so I'll take that. I'll take my cookie material, which we'll need later. I want my which one is it? Oh, here it is, my cutting board texture that I previously created in Photoshop. Heck, we'll bring in the cheese. We'll bring in the breads. Don't need those. Okay. Bring all that stuff in. And heck, we'll bring in the water ring just in case we need it. And so let's define these. The bread is a texture. The other bread is a texture. The cheese is a texture. The Corgi alpha is an alpha. The cutting board is a texture. The water ring is in alpha. This is our environment. I thought I got my SPSAR. There we go. Base material. Okay. And so we can choose to import them to our current session, our project, our shelf. I always like to do the project. Which reminds me, I should save my file. Save scene as. Always with the thing. Okay. So there's my project. Should have a substance folder, which I added. I added the scene FBX folder to the project folder and the substance folder, because that's how I do. By the way, you guys may notice, just FYI, my project folder is a little bit different than yours. I have actually made one master project folder and just put all of my stuff in here. I've kind of organized it in a way that I'm familiar with, which is why I have this scene FBX folder, this substance folder for our substance files, and my source images folder is broken down into different folders for what I will for our needs. So we have substance files, source files, and that and such. We'll probably have a couple of folders in here. Yep. So that is my project workflow. You're not required to use it, but that's just the way I like to roll. And you guys are far enough in the program that you can understand the difference between people's different texturing workflows. Chat. Who's talked in a while? Okay, so we got our cutting board. We can now change our display from glazed patio to Zen garden. I'm actually doing the night scene, so mine is going to be a little bit darker. The exposure is pretty low. I'm actually going to raise the exposure because I don't like that weird shading. Yeah, it's one of the things I always hate about this HDRI. So let's do 0. 1. Yeah, we'll just raise it to 1. It's a little bit raised. Okay, so a lot of people turn their visibility on their display settings off. I'm just going to blur mine a lot and maybe turn it down a little bit. You can also, by the way, go in here and show your wireframe. It is occasionally useful. You can change the color if you want, the opacity, but I'm just going to leave it off. Okay. Now, as we previously mentioned, we can go in here and we can sort of we could define our brush settings. I hate the stupid minimum thing. So we could go in here and I could be like, yeah, color, red, and height, whatever, roughness, high roughness, and just be like, brr. But the problem with this is, wow, this is really dark. That's what happens with these HDRIs. They're super weird. What the? Problem with my UVs, apparently. Doesn't matter. No one's going to see that anyway. But the problem is here, if I wanted to change anything, I can't go in and be like, okay, now it's blue. I'd have to like paint on top of it. And this can just get to be cumbersome. What I prefer is fill layers. I use fill layers pretty much exclusively. So I'll just name this one like base. And I'll be like, okay, base, you're going to be red. And you're going to have like low roughness. And, that's fine. That's all we need there. But then I'll make another base layer. And I'll be like, all right, you're going to be like blue. And then you're going to have some extra height. And you're going to be low roughness. And so you're like, okay, but that's just kind of everywhere. if I use a black mask, then I can go in and guys, I don't know why I make sound effects when I teach. Don't judge me. So let's use this weird brush. Minimum size. I hate that. I hate that. It's always like default weird. Yeah, we can just do some of this. And now the beauty of this whole system is I can go over here and I can make changes. So now I could change this color and be like, all right, seriously though, like something brighter. And I could be like, all right, but actually I wanted it to be negative height and I wanted it to be lower roughness similar to the object below it. And I could be like, oh, but actually I wanted you to be high roughness. And so on and so forth. So that's just the workflow we're going to kind of go with. Ooh, I have a chat. All right, so let's begin actually texturing. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a fill layer from a base. And then, actually, hang on. Go to my texture settings real quick. I'm going to eliminate normal because we're not going to use it. I'm not going to be painting in it, at least. And that's different than world space normal, by the way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this cutting board texture I made in Photoshop, and you guys should have one you made in Photoshop as well. And I'm just going to drag this into base color. Now, if you don't have one, don't worry. You can still follow along. Maybe use like some default texture or something that you can download off the internet. But here we go. So there we go. It's a little bit large, so I'm going to increase the scale, maybe 2. 2 is too much. 1.5. We'll try that. There we go. And I can change the offset. There we go. It's so dark. I'm really going to have to increase the exposure. Yeah. Just blowing out my dome, but whatever. We're actually going to have a night scene, so it is going to be pretty dark in our final. It looks weird with this bright dome behind it. Okay, so here's our texture. And that is our base layer. So once we have that, we need to define how rough it's going to be. If there's going to be any height, we're not going to adjust the height. It is not metallic. We could make it metallic for funsies. It's a chrome cutting board, a chrome wood cutting board. That is ridiculous. Metallic off. Even this, obviously, this is too glossy. So even a new cutting board is not going to be that glossy. It's probably going to be somewhere around like 0.3 or so. We should still be able to see some of it having reflections. That is way too much, but just a little bit. There we go. Basically, I want to see if it's at, if it's at a pretty low angle, I want to see those 0-degree reflections or those 90-degree reflections happening there a little bit, but we probably won't see much in the way of reflectivity from this angle. Maybe I'll lower it a little bit. We may adjust that. And that's the good thing about this workflow is I can go back and I can make adjustments to my base settings at any time. If I was doing just a regular paint layer, you can't do that. But this workflow is very non-destructive, so I can go back and I can make changes without having to delete the layer and paint it all over again. I got chat. Now, one thing I want to address. If we were to stop here, there would be no point to coming to Substance Painter. We could have done this in Photoshop. We really haven't done anything to our texture at this point. We just made a base texture and applied some material attributes. We could have done that using Photoshop and Arnold. There's no reason to do that if we didn't get into this next step. here is where we are going to talk about procedural details. Okay, so one of the things that's going to change from like an average artist to an artist that is a really good artist is going to be starting to think about object history. And this is something that employers are looking for. This is why I'm bringing this up to you. You guys should be thinking about object history in your objects when you're creating them. And what this basically means is I want you guys to try to tell a narrative with your textures. You should be trying to, I'm sorry, I'm just noticing a problem with this. 1.4, there we go. All right, feel better. So you should be trying to tell a history with your texture set. Something weird going on with my UVs. That means you need to think about what has happened to the texture. As an environment artist, I always say that your environments should be able to tell a story without any character there. If Sherlock Holmes was there, he could tell exactly everything that happened in your environment without needing a character there to tell it, because the evidence should be left behind in the object history. You should be creating that object history on your own. Now, for example, the exterior Zen garden, that is frequently cleaned by employees of Full Sail, so there shouldn't be much in the way of object history. A lot of the history is going to be the maintenance that Full Sail does on the actual territory, or it's going to be, some of the weathering, like paint chipping off of the trellis. The trellis is painted metal. It is not pure metal. It is metal with paint over it. But a lot of it does chip off, and they do repaint it. So at some point, you may be able to actually show some of the metal underneath, because it will be getting additional paint on it. That being said, a lot of the things in there are going to be regularly maintained. They're not going to have a lot of object history, but the objects that we see in the still life, the close up, those are objects that are basically brought from home. So they are going to have object history, and the cutting board is definitely going to have an object history. So here's what I want you guys to tell me. What has happened to this cutting board? What is the history of this cutting board? What's happened to it? What can we do to change the cutting board to look like it's been used?
We can definitely add some scratches around the center or the middle, showing that, it's been used by a knife.
Add some cuts. Good.
Yeah.
Chipping. Yeah, we could put some edge damage. That's what I tend to call that sort of thing. Chipping would be more like paint chipping off. But we could put some edge wear on it. I know how to do that. Xavier wants me to light it on fire. What do you do to your cutting boards, Xavier?
What do you mean? You don't do that to your cutting board? It's all part of the cooking process.
So the other thing I'm going to talk about is stains. And you should have reference to see what these look like. We don't require you guys to submit your painter reference, but go out and find reference of like what wood looks like when it's been burned, or what cutting boards look like when they've been cut, or what cutting boards look like when they've been stained. It adds flavor, but it also adds history, right? So think about things that have happened to your actual scene. And when I do the interior scene, I talk about specifically how, like, yes, your desk gets dirty and it gets gross, but you also clean it up. Like, you don't just leave all that grossness on there. For example, with water rings happen frequently, but they're also frequently cleaned, so they're not going to be everywhere. Now, a cutting board, again, a cutting board gets stains on it, but it gets frequently cleaned. You guys aren't just using your cutting boards, cutting meat on it and just leaving it. That's not sanitary. but it is going to be frequently cleaned. Things like the cuts are not going to be cleaned away, but the stains do eat into the surface of the cutting board and change it over time. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to add those sorts of details in. Go ahead and we're going to save. So we're going to create new layers for each detail that we're talking about. The first one we're obviously going to talk about is going to be the cuts. So we're going to need some reference for this, but what I'm going to do, actually have reference. I should just show you guys. Reference, probably in this folder. Substance reference. Okay, so, coffee stains. I have a cutting board, scratches, dust. It's probably not going to be dusty. Burns, water rings. So, stains. There's one that actually has stains. I think it's the main one that has stains from, there it is, from fruit, from cutting tomatoes apparently, and that's what it looks like. So what I'm going to do actually to get my color based on reference. So here's the crazy thing about wood cutting boards. It's going to have both darker and lighter cuts. We're going to focus on the lighter cuts. It just basically has to do with how deep your cuts go because you're cutting away the veneer of the surface. So we're going to create a layer that is going to be a little bit lighter, a little less saturated, a little bit lighter. And we're going to lower the height, right? Because they're cuts. And then we're going to increase the roughness quite a bit because, again, we're cutting in the surface. We're actually going to turn metal off entirely because we're not going to be painting with it. All right, so go back into material mode. That lighting from that dome light is just atrocious. I actually have a better image that I would prefer to use, but we're going to stick with this because it is what we're actually using to light our scene. Okay. So now we are going to apply our black mask. So there we go. Our cutting board is now completely masked off. So to do our cuts, we're really not going to have a lot of procedural effects. Usually, here's my workflow for when I'm working in my mask. I will go into Smart Mask and I will see if there's anything that I want to use. Sorry, Smart Mask, not Smart Materials. I'll go and see if there's anything I want to use here that kind of makes sense. I could actually, maybe we can put some surface wear on here. It's a lot of surface wear. Go into the mask editor. Global balance. Contrast. Contrast lower. Okay, that's terrible. I'm probably not going to do this. Yeah, so it's either off or horrible looking, so no go. But there's a bunch of effects in here that we could consider. This one is really good if you have paint on an object. So for example, if you really wanted to do the metal supports, you'd have to UV them, but you could do this sort of thing. You could also add paint damages in. And you could make those masks blend together. So actually, let's just kind of see what that would look like. We did paint. So, this layer would be the actual paint, and where it's scratched off, you would be able to see what's underneath. So we can go into the mask editor. We're probably not going to really need to do it. What are these? Oh, that's the roughness, and that, I guess, adjusts the... I don't know what those are doing. And let's go into mask editor. And here we could change the global blur, or the balance, or the contrast. We don't really need to on that one. That one's a pretty good one. And then we could add paint damages to it. There we go. There's our damage, which I think is using this metal edge wear. And we could change this to, because right now they're not working together, but we could change this so that they are working together by changing this to linear dodge add. Sorry, actually, we would want this to be subtracting. Nope. Try again. Multiply. There we go. Got it right eventually. And so you can see now that they are working together to add more of an effect. Turn this off than they would otherwise. So we turn this back to normal. That's what we're getting. I think that the metal edgeware kind of already considers the other one, but so we're not getting a huge effect, but there is a difference. And then there's this one, paint old. So this one would probably be subtract. Yeah, just adding little details to get rid of it. All right, so we're going to get rid of all of these because that's not what we want for a cutting board. So once I do that, then I typically look at the fills and I add those in. We will be actually, let's go ahead. We're going to add some fill. Because we're gonna do two things at once. We're gonna do the edge wear and we're gonna do the scratches in one mask. So there's one that I can use for edges. And there's a lot of these edge ones, you'll notice. The edge details are pretty popular. Edge dust, edge scratches. Let's show that one just for fun. Yeah, that's way too much detail. We need ours to be more subtle. So edge damages, this is a popular one that I use a lot. So what this is doing is it's taking that white effect, and I probably actually have this. Let's go over here. Changing my mind because it looks all blown out. I probably have this a little bit too bright. Okay, go back in here now. Back in our mask. So what this is doing is it's putting this little edge layer, and it's using our curvature map to figure out where to put these details. I don't like them over here because they wouldn't be appearing on that part. They'd only be appearing on the outside edges. So I could paint those out later, but that's kind of what we're looking at. I could actually increase the balance, but we're getting things a little bit outside the curvature, which I don't want. I could go down and maybe increase this texture 1. Nope, but again, that's affecting the curvature. Could increase this texture 2. That is actually making it go away. So actually decrease that. There we go. And now we're getting more actually along the edges, which is what I wanted. There we go. Again, we're getting a little bit too much here, but I'll just paint that out later. So there we go. And then there are fills. So if I go here and I go to add fill, these are things that I use frequently. And what you do is you create basically an empty node, and then we're going to work with a grunge, and you will add in with a grunge. So one that I really like, actually it might be considered a procedural, not a grunge. We're going to use this one, is the scratches. Where are they? Nope, that's stone details. You know what? I can just scratch. So, no, that's kind of more like if we're working with a metal, I think. or like a paint that's been like worn down. So let's try, well, that's just, what is that? That's dust, dusty scratched. That'd be good for like a glass. Paint scratched. Oh, I guess this is for paint scratched. What is this for then? What I want is, I think this one. Yeah, the scratches generator. This is a personal favorite. Wait, that's not the right one. Oh, it's scratch generator rough. Okay, so this one makes these nice big scratches. They're kind of random, but that's okay. And so we'll lower the width and we'll get rid of, where's that stupid spot? Scratch quality, scratch masking. Actually, lower that. Scratch dirtiness. Ah, spots. Get rid of the spots. Actually, yeah, we'll get rid of the spots because they wouldn't be there. There we go. And so we'll add this by going to a linear dodge add. And so now our two effects are working together. This is driving me nuts, so I'm going to fix this right now. I'm going to add a paint. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that in here, and I'm going to go to brushes and grab my favorite brush. Where is it? Dirt 2, best brush. I'll just lower my stroke opacity here because I'm going to paint this guy out because he shouldn't be there. This guy here. And then, because I want the ones on the outer edge. It's just this inside edge that we wouldn't get. If I press C, I can go to the mask. You know what? 100%. It's edge detail. It's supposed to be on the edges, right? And it wouldn't be here because this is not actually getting any edge exposure. All right, and there's our scratches. Okay, great. And so on top of this, we got our edge wear, we've got our scratches. What I'm going to add now is I'm just going to add another paint. This one can stay normal because this layer is empty except for where we painted. So we're going to go here and we're going to go to add another paint. And this one, we're actually going to add some scratches to. In fact, we're going to use the scratches to brush. So a couple of things I want you guys to think about. Change this to white. When you are doing scratches, minimum flow, come on. When you're doing a cutting board, when you work with your cuts, typically your cuts tend to not be very random. They tend to actually be very much in a similar direction. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go down here and we're going to turn the angle jitter to almost nothing. Maybe a little bit because you're not going to be perfect, but size jitter, Okay, we can have some size jitter, definitely some flow jitter, and yeah, yes to position jitter. So those are going to be the randomness elements. We're going to leave this to tangent warp. Yeah, we don't need to change any of this stuff. Size, we can actually change using our Wacom tablet, which, by the way, if I didn't mention, you should be using your Wacom tablet. And I can change the rotation here if I need to, but I don't think I'm going to. All right, so then we can just add these cuts in. A little bit more spacing. No, that's not going the direction I want. Nope. All right, this is not the angle I want. And so basically, I'm actually going to make this quite large. I want to add a bunch of our cuts, mostly in the center. I'll get a couple going at the opposite angle because occasionally you need to make like a horizontal cut. Now, I was intentionally a little wild. Also, we want to pay attention to the fact that if we were to turn all of our layers back on, the majority of what we're going to see is down here. So stuff up here is not even going to be visible, which is annoying. So let's get some more cuts down in this area. And we'll solo that again. Now, one of the things I want to point out, if we look at our mask, we've got cuts down in those little grooves. And those are details from our procedural one as well. We wouldn't actually have those. So I could go in there and painstakingly remove them, but I'm not going to. What I'm instead going to do is I'm going to add one more smart material. And this one is super handy because I'm going to add, smart mask. I'm going to add the occlusion. So what this is going to do is it's going to put this kind of mask on top of it. But what I'm going to change this to is I'm actually going to, first I'm going to invert it. And most of these you'll find have an invert. There we go. So there we go. And then I'm going to change this to multiply. And so that removes everything from the black area. So now we got this. There we go. So that is stage one for our cutting board. What do you guys think? It's pretty good, right? But we're not done. We need to add our stains in. Need some water. So what we're going to do for the stains is I'm actually going to take my base layer and I'm going to duplicate it. And I'm going to make this my stains layer. And the stains are usually above the cuts for the most part. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the color channel to multiply. I'm going to lower that opacity a bit, but I definitely want the effect to be noticeably like multiplying the color. We're not going to have any control over the height, so that is going to remain the same. Actually, let's look at our height. What are we looking at here? How does that look? We might need to go in here and lower the height a little bit more to get more of the effect that we want. There we go. So our stains are going to wash out our cuts, but that is realistically how it tends to work. We're going to lower our roughness a bit. So where the stains are, we're going to have more reflectivity. That's probably too low. Let's try like 0.2. Looks a little weird at the 0-degree angle, but we're not really going to see the cutting board at that angle anyway. Okay, so we're getting a little bit more reflectivity in from the 0-degree reflections. Not a ton, but this is going to be because of the added water in the actual layer. We're not going to add any metallic. This is not a metal object. We're just ignoring metal for now. And so that is kind of a good start. Of course, we're going to start by adding a black mask. And next, we're going to do the same workflow. I'm going to start looking at smart masks and see if there's any that make sense. I do like to try surface wear on this one. Some of the times I go with it. Some of the times I don't. I actually like to turn the cuts off because they get a little distracting. So let's check our mask settings. Turn the balance down a little bit. So let's turn the balance down and let's turn the blur up a bit. There we go. That's not bad. I can't control the offset in a smart mask, which is one of the problems. I don't think. Usually I can't. Histogram position. There we go. Histogram contrast. All right. I'm going to end up painting on top of this anyway, but there we go. And then let's consider a fill. Sometimes I use multiple fills. I may not today, but I always like to think about possibly adding some of this stuff. So let's go ahead and add in a nice grunge. What about this one? There we go. That's kind of nice. We'll add in a linear dodge add. We can actually lower the opacity on our base. Turn that off. So there we go. So we're getting different levels of details. I'm going to lower this one as well. So that one's a little bit heavier. We could change the balance here as well. Brush pattern. No, it doesn't do anything. There we go. And I could add another fill. I tend to do more multiple fills with the desk. So if you watch the interior, you can watch the interior I did last month, and you'll see I did multiple fill layers. So let's see. Let's do this leaks one just for fun. That's interesting. Don't think a cutting board would have that detail, but we could go in. So let's rotate this. Because with the fills, you can rotate and you can control their offset. You can barely see that exists. Oh no, it is giving it a nice like I've tried to brush it off before effect. That's how it would look. Okay, so we'll change this one to linear dodge add. Actually, I'm going to crank this balance up. Crank this contrast. So there we go. The main problem now is that I think we have a little bit too much. So I may actually tone this down. Actually, yeah, I'm gonna shoot this back down because we definitely have a little bit too much going on. And then finally, I always do a paint layer. Brushes. Dirt 2. So in here, because we have so much detail, I'm actually going to focus on removing some detail. So I'm going to use this brush, and I'm going to kind of, forgot about that stupid minimum size. I'm gonna lower my opacity though. Just kind of paint some of this out. When I'm doing this, I like to go in and kind of make everything visible. And the reason for that is I kind of want to know what details are actually going to be visible and seen. So obviously, you know, you want to focus on this area. And I may, let's go to grunge really quickly. I may actually lower this one just so we can see it a little bit well. So I may change its position. There we go. It's nice. And then, you know, you'll notice I'm turning the gradient or the opacity down, and that gives me a lot of control because now I can kind of be like, all right, just kind of like painting it out a little bit. In fact, if we go into our mask, we'll see exactly what's going on. Now, I'm not loving this. Oh, I'm not loving this effect actually. It's a little bit much. Lower that, make it like nice and subtle. Oh, what just happened? I don't know. You know, we're going to have far less stains towards the edges. So just kind of, you know, that last little bit of artist override. All right, so maybe I want the stroke opacity higher. You know, in the end, it ends up being like some very subtle details, but those details do end up being quite noticeable. Let's turn our cuts back on. Yeah. So there we go. That's our cutting board. We turn everything back on. That's what it ends up looking like. I'm going to do a couple of things to this cutting board before we finish up, and it's really just because there's a couple of things that I want you guys to learn about. So let's go ahead, and I'm just going to use one of our standard materials for this. Really, is rubber a smart material? It's not really that smart. Rubber tire, rubber dry. So I'm going to put like a rubber base on here. Just black mask. And then I like to show off the polygon fill tool because I don't think a lot of other teachers show this. But what this allows me to do is if I go to 2D, 3D, I can take this little area over here. Oh, it's outside the 0 to 1. That's where I made my mistake. I see. And I can just paint it so it's rubber. Actually, what I wanted to do was UV shell. So that's useful. You know, you could paint by vertex or object or our face, but UV shell is the most useful. So that's all for that. And then I also want to make, I'm going to just make my own layer for this. I'm going to make a logo. And I'm going to make it like some black paint. Actually, you know what? I'm feeling, so is there a paint material? What we got here? Steel paint. Spray paint. Let's try it. Let's see what it looks like. What is? Oh, that's just silly. Your tag. Do they allow you to change the text? This is what happens when you're in smart materials. Let's get rid of that. It's not what I want. Oh, I'm not even in smart materials. I'm just in regular materials. Well, all right. Doesn't matter. I'm going to make my own. So let's use a nice color. Actually, I'm going to go with like a dark black. So orange. And so what I want to show you guys is stencils really quickly because they're super useful. There's a bunch of stencils that we could just use that are basically in Maya. You can go to alphas, like there's just billions of the suckers that we could use. It's like a Celtic knot. But what I want is this one. That's mine. A bunch of substance logos. It's probably in there because Wes has to use them for his demos frequently. It's Abstergo. Okay. So for this, what we're going to do is we're going to paint in the layer. Need a black mask. And go down until you get to stencil. And if you hold S, you can shrink it down. Watch this be in the wrong corner. Make them pretty small. And we'll zoom in. Oh, of course, it's based on the screen, so. There we go. You can just. And because I got that stroke opacity buildup, it's a little bit randomly lighter in certain areas. So there we go. There's my little logo. You can also do it on the screen here, but it kind of works a little bit better in the UVs if you can do it that way. So there we go. That's fun. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to make a couple of adjustments here. So I'm going to make this lower in roughness, add a little bit of height so it's kind of sticking up. Oh, it is on the complete opposite side of where I wanted it to be. Well, that's just annoying. All right, well, let's put him over here then. Actually, you know what? We'll do it in this one just so you guys can see how that works. There we go. All right, let's go back to 3D only and clear the stencil out, but the paint is still there. I could, let's go to height and change this from linear dodge add to replace. There we go. Kind of got rid of our cutting mark there. So that's fun. All right, so the next thing I'm going to show you guys before we go on our little break is really just going to be for funsies. All right, so no height, getting rid of height. We're just going to do color because this is going to use enough resources as it is. Somebody wanted me to burn the cutting board earlier, so it's the perfect excuse. We have these brushes. They're really fun. They're particle brushes. So this is not an animated, this is an animated effect, but the animation isn't something you can save out. So if I want to, what it is, it's a procedural effect to show how something would be affected, how the texture would be affected by a procedural effect such as fire. So if we were to, it kind of spreads more if it goes up. Put a little bit over here. See how it got in that crack a little bit. This is like weirdly high roughness. Oh, because I didn't put any roughness on it. So we'll make it low roughness. Okay. So we could use fire. There's a couple of other effects. Let's do the laser pew-pews. Oh, it's low roughness. I need high roughness. There we go. So we can go in here and go pew-pew, lasers. And these they're particle emitters, so they have tons and tons of options you can play with to change how the effect works when you run it. There's also this kind of like fractured glass one. If you had like a glass object and you wanted it to shatter, you could look like it had been impacted. You can do that. So if it was like somebody's visor and they've been like on the road, like it was a Mad Max one and they've been like using it a lot, it would have like a fractured glass effect because, they're not careful with that. They're living in Mad Max world. I don't know what this one's useful for, but it's like, oh, that's still they don't like to change. Is that electric lights? Doesn't look like electric lights. It looks like, I guess it is. It looks more like the Zerg. And there's this like veiny one. I get a lot of these veiny ones. I don't really know what they're supposed to be doing. I guess if you wanted to like show the veins, you'd have to be really subtle with it, but yeah, it would be for character artist, not a character artist. Definitely, I think you would need to change the effects because that is really veiny. Yeah, I don't think human veins look like that. So you would need to play with the emitter. The other ones that are really good are the leaks. So if we were to have like a watery surface, how water tends to build up, leaks heavy. If there was a slant to our cutting board, this would be doing a lot more because it tends to, oh yeah, that would actually be a good example. So it would build up in the crack. Still on leaks heavy. And it would kind of like go down the side. That was really veiny. Anyway, there's also rain and sandstorm, which is, just to get that procedural effect. Oh, and there's broken glass. So this is like one isolated glass shatter. They're good procedural effects. I haven't found a ton of use for them, but I haven't been working with the specific things that would need it. Just want you guys to be aware of those. All right, so we're kind of done with the cutting board. I'm going to stop here and give you guys a chance to ask me any questions you might want to ask. And then in like 4 minutes, we're going to take breaks. So that's why I'm giving you guys a chance to ask questions before we go on break. Anybody? When we come back, we're going to do the metal, and then we'll export, and then we'll get back into Arnold. So we're pretty much done with the cutting board. I'm pretty happy with the way it is. I may, there are little things I might adjust, like, I'm not super happy with the color of where the wood is. Honestly, I should probably have another wood grain under there, but I don't. I want it to be brighter, so that would be that. I probably have a little bit too much height, but these are things that I can easily like obsess over later and change. And in fact, the height is going to be multiplied by the Arnold effect or the Arnold bump map effect. So can mess with that in engine, so to speak. Yeah. So that being said, let's switch over to the candle holder and then we'll go on our little break. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the cheese and the knife and the bread and just hide the cookie, and we will start focusing on the metal of the candle holder. So for this one, because it's a metal, I'm going to make my life easier, and I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to grab like a brass. Wow. This keyboard sucks. I hate this keyboard. Grab like pure brass, and it'll be our bottom layer. It's blown out because our HDRI sucks. Problem is you need HDRIs for a dome light to work, but they're blown out in Painter. To talk to Wes about that. So for this one, we're going to do tarnish, we're going to do some fingerprints, and we're going to do some dust. And we're going to do those sort of effects. Oh, and we're going to get some rust in. So we're going to do tarnish and rust, and then we're going to do a little bit with fingerprints and stuff, but the fingerprints will actually be affected in the tarnish. So the tarnish is just going to be a layer that's going to be a little bit different color from the pure brass. So really all we're really going to do is change the color and maybe a little bit of the roughness slightly. And we have reference for that as well. We'll talk about that when we come back from break. But I think it's time we had break. We've been going for almost 2 hours, and I haven't had breakfast. So I'm going to sneak over and get some breakfast and record out the first half of lecture. I will see you guys when we get back. Hang on. Nobody leave yet. I'm going to take another screenshot of the chat here. Okay, everybody, I am going to close the Zoom for a little bit and go on break. I want you guys to be back at 9, let's say 9:20. All right. So I'll see you guys back at 9:20. I'm going to save, and I'm going to close the Zoom because I'm going to start recording the lecture out. So I will see you guys back in a little bit. All right, everybody. Go get some coffee. Go get some food. I'm going to do the same. See you guys in a bit.